Good afternoon and welcome to the Osterville Village Library. My name is Amy Wolf. I'm the programming coordinator here at the OVL. It is my great pleasure to introduce today's program. Chocolate from the Aztecs to bakers, Hershey's, Cadbury's, Schraffts, and Toll House cookies, presented by Anthony Sammarco. Few foods have traveled so far, meant so much, and delighted so many across centuries and continents as chocolate. This afternoon, we journey back to the world of the Aztecs, where cacao was revered as a sacred gift, consumed as a ceremonial drink, valued as currency, and woven into ritual and daily life. To guide us through this rich and layered history, we are honored to welcome generous friend to the OVL, Anthony Sammarco, renowned author, historian, and master storyteller with his deep knowledge of cultural and social history and his gift for bringing the past vividly to life. He will reveal how chocolate's story is intertwined with exploration and industry and everyday pleasure. Please join me in welcoming Anthony Sammarco.
I'm just going to hit that. Are you recording? Oh, you're installing.
I am not installing.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you all for coming. It's really a nice gesture on a Saturday during the winter. Oh, gee.
I do not.
I didn't touch it.
We're not installing anything.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to see you. This is a lecture on chocolate, and many people think in some ways we know what it is. Of course, we enjoy the end product. But chocolate was known as chocolatle 1,000 years ago, and it was a well-known commodity used by Aztecs and Toltecs, not only to eat, but to eat the leaves for quick energy and use the cacao beans for a currency. By the 19th and 20th century, the companies such as Baker's Chocolate, Hershey's, Cadbury, Schraffts were well-known purveyors of quality candy. But Toll House cookies, and I hear there are some here that Marianne Colombo made, are a great example of something in the 1940s. Well, the whole aspect is the Oxford Dictionary describes chocolate as a sweet, hard food made from the cocoa beans used in cooking to add taste to cakes or eaten as a sweet. Yet this is the end result. The origin of the word chocolate can be traced to the Aztec word chocolatle, which referred to a bitter drink brewed from cacao beans. And the Latin name for the cacao tree, the Theobroma cacao, means food of the gods. Now, during that period, you realize that the ancient Toltec law identifies Quetzalcoatl, seen on the left-hand side, as the feathered serpent god, as planter of cacao trees in the tropics of southern Mexico. He was called the god of life, the giver of the drink of the gods, chocolate. And both the Mayas and Aztecs regarded chocolate as a potent aphrodisiac. However, he was also known as the inventor of books and the calendar, and giver of maize to mankind, and sometimes referred to as a symbol of death and resurrection. The mask on the left-hand side, which is in the collection of the London Museum, is something that was made in the 16th century, and it was usually because of a twice annual crop. One honored member of the community would wear this mask as a fertility rite, hoping for a fertile crop. But they also had a goddess of chocolate, and it was Ixcacao. And she's the Mayan goddess of the cacao tree and chocolate that is made from the fruit of that tree. She was often invoked in prayer along with the corn mother, the rain god, and other agricultural deities. A prayer quoted from an old Mayan legend to promote a good harvest in times of hunger is as follows. Ixcanil, goddess of seed, hear me. Ixtoc, goddess of rain, help me. And Ixcacao, goddess of chocolate, see my tears and come to my aid. Well, in many instances, you realize what they were doing was to raise cacao so they could make something called chocolatle. Now, chocolatle is something that I've even tried to make. I drank it, though it was not the best, but it's more of a savory drink than a sweet drink. And seen here, it not only had chili pepper, milk, vanilla bean, cinnamon sticks, nutmeg, and allspice. So it was something that not only one group drank cold, but the other drank warm. So this was something in a lot of ways totally different from the cocoa that we enjoy today. But during that period, the Aztecs and Mayans associated chocolate with Quetzalcoatl, who, according to one legend, was cast away by the other gods for sharing chocolate with humans and identified its extraction from the pod with the removal of the human heart in sacrifice. In contrast to the Mayans, who liked their chocolate warm, the Aztecs drank it cold, seasoning it with a broad variety of additives, including the petals of Cymbopuleatum pendiflorum tree, the chili pepper, allspice, vanilla, and sometimes honey. Many people realized that this was a drink that was reserved for the aristocracy of the culture. And perhaps the most notorious Aztec chocolate lover of all was the Aztec ruler Montezuma II, who allegedly drank gallons of chocolatle each day for energy and as an aphrodisiac. It must have helped. He was said to have had 17 children. It's also that he reserved some of his cacao beans for his military as it gave them energy. Because cocaine is extracted from the leaves of the Theobroma cacao tree, I'm sure it gave them a lot of energy. But because you wanted this to be a frothy, savory drink, you would use a wood molino. Now, this was something you'd rub between your hands to create a froth. And seen on the left is a Toltec warrior, in one hand a bow and arrow, in the other a molinillo. This was something that was endemic of the period. But Montezuma II, seen here in a conjectural drawing of 1970, is seen giving gifts, including the recipe for chocolatle, to Hernandez Cortez and his men to establish friendly relations, display his wealth and power, and as a diplomatic gesture. It backfired, and the Spanish subjugated the Toltecs and Aztecs. However, Cortez took that recipe back to Spain. And it was an important feature to realize that this is, again, something that the King of Spain would give as a dowry to his granddaughter when she married Louis XIV of France. She was the one who said she put cream and sugar in what was chocolatle to make it a very sweet rather than savory drink. Well, the Aztecs used the seeds of the cacao to make this drink, and the product was become known as cacao to the Spaniards. The Indians of Mexico believed that the Theobroma cacao tree was of divine origin. And of course, it was highly valued as the beans were not only a food, but a medium of exchange, as the beans were used as a form of currency. And when Cortez returned to Spain, he was lauded for the introduction of the new drink. But the cacao beans were so highly prized that they were reputedly hidden in Spanish monasteries and remained a well-kept secret, only available to the wealthy since their price was astronomical. Well, the Theobroma cacao tree seen here comes in 24 varieties. They weren't hybridized, but they grew naturally, and each one of the varieties had a specific flavor. But the chocolate tree, known scientifically as the Theobroma cacao tree, thanks to 18th century Swedish naturalist Carl von Linné, is a dwarf-like evergreen tree growing an average of 12 to 15 feet in height, with a silver bark trunk from 5 to 8 inches in diameter. When young, the Theobroma cacao tree is protected from the intensity of the sun by the planting of trees that give it shade. Banana trees, lemon trees, coral trees, and cotton trees are among those planted to shade the fragile Theobroma cacao trees. And the protective trees are often referred to as Madres del Cacao, mothers of the cacao, and they also help to protect the soil from drying out in the intense heat and sun. Since the 13th century, it was known that there were cacao plantations, especially in the area of Mexico, northern South America, the West Indies, the Caribbean, and even Africa. And during that period of time, it was something that many people realized was something that, with cultivation, could actually produce a fruitful crop. Well, this is a cacao pod seen on the left-hand side, and it was something that was domesticated 5,300 years ago in South America, in present-day Ecuador, by the Mayan culture. But as you can see, each pod would have an average of 35 to 40 individual cacao beans. They're about the size of your thumbnail. But on the right-hand side, when they're opened, they have a membrane which holds them together, and that membrane has to be removed when they're actually to be produced. Now, seen here in an 18th century print, these cacao pods were anywhere from 9 to 11 inches in length, 5 to 7 inches in circumference. And again, as you see it broken open, the beans would be anywhere from 35 to 40. Now, many people realized in some instances that the popularity of chocolate brought with it a thriving slave market, as between the early 1600s and the late 1800s, the laborious and slow processing of the cocoa bean was labor intensive. Cacao plantations spread as the English, Dutch, and French colonized and planted cacao. And with the depletion of indigenous workers, largely to disease, cacao production was often the work of laborers and African slaves. In that way, we began to realize in this stereo view of 1905 that once the ripening was to take place, the harvesting began. The people standing hold poles. They're 15 feet in height, and there's a hook at the end. Once the cacao pod has ripened, it can be hit from the branch or even the trunk of the tree from which it grows, and the people in the foreground with the wicker baskets would begin to collect them. During that process, people seen here would actually begin to break open the cacao bean and remove the individual seeds. Well, the cacao pods are gathered, and where workers cut them open with machete, scooped out the seeds and membrane. Oxidation occurs almost at once, causing the beans to turn brown. And the beans are then spread on long, low platforms in the direct sun so that they're only a few inches deep and will be allowed to dry. The beans ferment during the drying process with the natural sugars swiftly turning to acidic acids. And once fully dried, a process that can take several days to a few weeks, depending on weather conditions, the cacao seeds are then manually cleaned of any pulp or membrane that remain and are bagged for shipment. Just like beans that we have in our kitchen, that in my house are at least 10 years old, they have shelf life. Once they're air dried, they do have to realize these plantations 10 miles north or south of the equator, they dry within a matter of days. In that way, cacao was made, not just as chocolatle in the Aztec and Toltec cultures, but as chocolate in Western Europe. Well, seen here, cacao and the Theobroma cacao tree was the chocolate tree, fruit of the gods. And the seeds of the cacao tree have an intense, bitter taste and must be fermented to develop the flavor. After fermentation, the seeds are dried, cleaned, and roasted, and the shell is removed to produce cocoa nibs, which are then ground to a cocoa mass, unadulterated chocolate in rough form. And once the cocoa mass is liquefied by heating, it is called chocolate liquor. And the liquor may also be cooled and processed into its two components, chocolate solids and cocoa butter. Now, cocoa butter will be extracted throughout that period of anyone producing chocolate. Cocoa butter is used in lipstick and the cosmetic industry, but they also make white chocolate with cocoa butter. Does anybody like white chocolate? You love it. You know, there's no chocolate in it whatsoever. It's only cocoa butter, fat, flour, and vanilla flavoring. That's why our mothers always told it was more fattening than anything else. Well, seen here, when the period of the 13th through the 19th century, one would roast these beans over an open fire. Once they were roasted and the shell was removed, the beans would then be ground to create what we would know of as cacao. And the cacao, and you see in supermarkets or specialty shops that have 85 to 90% cacao, is pure, unadulterated chocolate. But we can't eat it, except if it's 2 a.m. and there's nothing else in the house to eat. But once roasted, the cacao beans are slowly ground between large granite millstones that have a center hole and grooved surfaces to allow rotation. Under heat and tremendous pressure, the cocoa butter from the mixture melts and combines with the beans to form glutinous chocolate liquor, which also has a fragrant chocolate aroma. This chocolate liquor is then treated according to the type of chocolate that is to be made. And for unsweetened chocolate, the chocolate liquor is simply poured into molds and allowed to set in cooling rooms. And the result was a solid bar or rectangular cake of chocolate that could be scraped into boiling water or warm milk for a delicious and refreshing drink. Well, many people realize in some ways by the early 18th century, thanks to the granddaughter of the King of Spain, that this was a drink of choice. And this 18th century etching shows three men enjoying their drink of choice. On the left is a man from Arabia enjoying coffee. In the center is a Chinese man enjoying tea. And on the right is an Aztec man enjoying chocolatle, the savory chocolate drink. But if you look closely, because this was reserved for royalty and aristocracy, it was usually enjoyed out of a hollowed out coconut shell with gilt mounts. And you notice in the print, it's served warm. So chocolatle, a savory drink, aphrodisiac, it was a wonderful cure-all type of a drink. But it actually came to Dorchester. And in 1765, Dr. James Baker of Dorchester met John Hannon, quote, a penniless Irish immigrant, unquote, crying on the banks of the Neponset River. Inquiring to his obvious distress, Baker learned that Hannon was destitute, but that he possessed the skill of making chocolate, having learned it in England. As chocolate and cocoa were not only delicious commodities, but also fashionable extravagances imported from Europe, Baker financially backed Hannon in a leased small wood frame mill in Milton Village, where Hannon's best chocolate was manufactured for almost 15 years, with an incredible money-back guarantee policy that stated, quote, if the chocolate does not prove good, the money will be returned, unquote. Well, Baker's was the oldest manufacturer of chocolate in what is today the United States. But the Neponset River also had very many industries. The first grist mill in 1634 in New England. In 1678, the first gunpowder mill. And in 1728, Boys and McLean, the first paper mill. So Hannon wrapped his chocolate in paper produced by Boys and McLean, but you can see the scales of justice on the left-hand side. This was fantastic. And of course, Hannon was somebody who, in many instances, made Dr. Baker a very wealthy man. Seen in a conjectural print of 1937, the mill itself, seen on the right-hand side, also had a water wheel. The Neponset had been tamed as early as 1634 for water power. So the grist mills were turned according to that mill wheel. Dr. James Baker was probably one of the wealthiest men in Dorchester. He had been graduated from Harvard College in 1760. He studied for the ministry. He taught school. And after 9 months of arduous study, he became a doctor of medicine. But he was somebody who backed Hannon. But Hannon, after 14 years, decided to go to the West Indies to buy cacao beans. He never returned, and the House of Baker Chocolate was incorporated after the widow Hannon sold her half share. Dr. James Baker, his son Edmund Baker, and his grandson Walter Baker, seen here, were all graduated from Harvard College. But Walter Baker got a law degree from Judge Tappan Reeves, so he was able to protect the business that had many competitors. Baker devoted himself to the chocolate mill and began an expansion that continued unabated for the next 25 years. He introduced a less expensive chocolate known as Lapham, which he named for his employee Elisha Lapham. He also introduced spiced cocoa sticks in 1840, homeopathic chocolate that we'll discuss in 1844, J.G. French's chocolate, named for Baker's coachman, Jacob French, Caracas chocolate in 1849, and German sweet chocolate perfected by Baker's former coachman, Samuel German, in 1852. I don't know if you had to be a coachman to be a person that made chocolate, but it turned out that three of them were really quite successful. Well, Walter Baker became president in 1818 when his father Edmund stepped down. Baker branded his company with this logo. It shows a young maiden with a cornucopia spilling forth the different types of chocolate they made at that time. This is 1824. So they made premium number one, which was an 85 to 90% cacao count bar of unsweetened chocolate, and cocoa, and chocolate broma. Has anybody ever heard of chocolate broma? It's a very refreshing, effervescent drink, and you have to realize Bakers promoted this up and down the eastern seacoast. And it said, in the opinions of eminent physicians of Boston, he had even people um, saying how good it was for you. Broma is a preparation of pure cocoa and other highly nutritious substances, often flavored and sweetened. It contains a large proportion of theobromide and possesses powerful restorative qualities. Its delicacy of flavor and perfect solubility make it a favorite drink among thousands. And medical men of all shades of opinion recommend it to their patients instead of tea or coffee. Well, seen here in this advertisement, these doctors said, quote, "We have tried the broma manufactured by Mr. Walter Baker of Dorchester and find it a pleasant article of food. From knowledge of its ingredients, we think it will be useful to invalids and persons recovering from disease, especially to such as dislike the articles usually recommended. It also offers good nourishment for children," unquote. Well, these men were not only physicians, but they were among the most respected of Bostonians. In addition to Dr. Jonathan Ware, who lived in Milton, this group of eminent and well-respected physicians included Dr. John Collins Warren, the first doctor to operate with ether at the Ether Dome of the Massachusetts General Hospital, George Hayward, John Holmans, Walter Channing, and Zabdale Boylston Adams. This was really a ticket to fame, but they were also the same class of 1811 at Harvard as Walter Baker was. So I'm sure they got a lifetime supply of broma. But Walter Baker also made a variety of things different than what his father and grandfather had made. This broadside, which is 5 feet by 3 feet, shows that they made chocolate, cocoa, broma, cocoa paste, homeopathic, and dietetic cocoa. Well, homeopathic medicine was something in the 19th century that many Bostonians ascribed to. There was even a homeopathic hospital later to be absorbed into the Boston University Medical Center. But homeopathic cocoa is made by creating a tincture from the cocoa beans, which is then repeatedly diluted with alcohol or water and vigorously shaken. And this process is believed to transfer the essence of the substance while removing its material properties. But what does homeopathic cocoa offer? Well, headaches and heaviness in the neck, particularly those that improve with eating. It offers digestive issues such as heartburn, flatulence, and loss of appetite. It offers a change of mood and emotional support for conditions like anxiety, stress, or mild depression. Menstrual disorders and complaints in females. Cardiovascular health support, such as regulating blood pressure and improving circulation. And of course, skin and hair issues, including dandruff with scaly flakes and itching. Where do we get homeopathic cocoa? We'd all be rejuvenated. So the whole idea was that Baker had increased the company tenfold. But he died in 1852. His brother Sidney Williams ran it for another 2 years until he died in 1854. And at that point, Henry Pierce, Walter Baker's stepnephew, assumed the presidency of Walter Baker Chocolate Company in 1854 and ran it until his death in 1896. He increased the company 40-fold, and by the time of his death, he not only saw 3,600 workers, but a very profitable business. One of his best friend's wife, Mrs. Thomas Bailey Aldrich, summed up Henry Pierce's character, saying that he was, quote, "in all ways a strong man, strong in will, even to obstinacy, strong in his sense of honor, strong in his love for his friends, strong in his sympathies, strong in his patriotism, strong in his likes and dislikes. And to those who knew him best, there was a certain charming simplicity in his character, due to the fact it was the clear and direct product of his nature, upheld by outside influences," unquote. Well, Mrs. Aldrich might have been a little bit one-sided. When he died, he left $71 million, which in 2026 would equate to almost $1 billion. He had a plantation in Canton, Massachusetts called Ponkapog, and now it's actually part of the Ponkapog Golf Course. It was 1,100 acres, and he left it to the Aldriches. So you can imagine in some ways why they had thought of him as a strong man. But Henry Pierce was somebody who began to expand the Baker chocolate complex almost immediately. He had inherited it, so to speak, in 1854, but he was never allowed to become president and owner until 1884. He paid to the trustees of the Baker estate $3,000 annually, which was a huge sum of money. But what he did was to hire an architect by the name of Nathaniel Bradley. Has anybody ever heard of Nathaniel Bradley? Well, do you know the South End, how you have repetitive red brick, swell bay facade row houses? They share a uniformity of height, setback, and building material. Well, Bradley designed that, and he was a very well-known architect. But by the 1870s, he specialized in commercial architecture. And seen here, built in 1872, was the Pierce Mill. Now, this was directly on Adam Street in Dorchester Lower Mills, backed up to the Neponset River. But it was built in a town that had just become part of the city of Boston in 1870, and it had a population of only 12,000 people. This was a distinctly urban structure, much like you'd see in downtown Boston. It also had the first electricity and the first telephone. It was an important feature to realize that Henry Pierce would have 9 new mills built between 1872 and 1896. But this trade card, which is now in the Boston Athenaeum, has in the 4 corners what are medals. And you had to realize, beginning in 1854, Baker and Pierce had been doing exhibitions, but Pierce entered them in the Topsfield Fair, the Marshfield Fair, and of course, even the Barnstable Fair. And he won these medals, the highest premiums awarded at the principal exhibitions of the world. So he was competing against manufacturers of chocolate from England, France, Germany, Switzerland. His chocolate was said to be as good. Well, in that instance, he still made premium number 1. This is a half-pound package. This is something you really do need to combine with other ingredients, including sugar, to make it palatable. But it was a big sale. And of course, he made German sweet chocolate. Now, we know about Samuel German being Walter Baker's coachman, but shortly thereafter, he took a job at the chocolate mill. By 1852, he perfected a new chocolate that was called German's sweet chocolate. This recipe, which had a higher content of sugar than Baker's premium number 1, was said to be, quote, palatable, nutritious, and healthful, and is a great favorite with children, unquote. Well, Walter Baker bought the recipe, which was simply adding sugar to the molten chocolate, from Sammy German for $1,000 and began marketing as Baker's German sweet chocolate. Doesn't sound like a lot of money, but it was 10 times his annual salary. They also would make breakfast cocoa, and this was 55% of the average annual sales throughout the 19th century. But this, by a peculiar process in the manufacture of cocoa, the theobromide and nutritive portions of the cocoa are preserved, with more than double the strength than other preparations contain, and the delicious natural flavor of the nut is fully developed. And for persons with delicate constitutions and weak nerves, it is unrivaled as an article of diet and is equally beneficial in maintaining the physical and mental vigor of those who are in health. It adds strength to the body, new life to the exhausted brain, quiets the nervous system, harmonizes the workings of the digestive organs, and gives purity to the blood. So after you have your homeopathic cocoa, you want to have a cup of breakfast cocoa. Well, by 1876, Walter Baker, which was the largest manufacturer of chocolate in the United States, produced a cookbook. They called it a receipt book, much like people of the 18th century might have called it. This is the cover on the left-hand side, and it showed 100 pages, full color, of the different things you could make to impress family and friends. But on the cover, again, in the 4 corners were gold medals. One, as one says, the Exhibition of Industry of All Nations in New York in 1853. But on the right-hand side is one of the pages. Now, how many of us wouldn't want chocolate caramel walnuts, fudge hearts, Baker's chocolate divinity fudge, or even chocolate oysterettes, which were bent crackers dipped in chocolate. You could make these, impress family and friends, and feel that the cookbook was a wonderful thing. But he also would adopt a new trademark. The logo of the young maiden with the cornucopia was outdated, and Henry Pierce was to adopt La Belle Chocolatier as his trademark in 1881, having seen the pastel portrait known as Das Chocolaten Maiden by the Swiss painter Jean-Étienne Lyotard at the Dresden Art Gallery in Germany. He promptly renamed it La Belle Chocolatier and formally adopted her as the chocolate server as his registered trademark in 1883. And subsequently, it became synonymous with the oldest manufacturer of chocolate in ensuing years. This was stamped onto every wooden box, in every advertising and marketing flyer, and La Belle Chocolatier was readily identifiable by both adults and children. But it was something that was used also in some ways for a marketing aspect. And you would see not only cocoa services, but even silver spoons. But one company that became a rival in the latter part of the 19th century was the Hershey Company. This was founded in 1876 by Milton Hershey, seen on the upper left-hand side. And after apprenticing as a confectioner in Philadelphia, Hershey concentrated on making chocolate in a mill in his hometown of Derry Church, which was renamed in 1906 Hershey, Pennsylvania. Hershey, now get this, with two workers hired from the Walter Baker and Company, manufactured milk chocolate so successfully that he saw success almost at once, and his chocolate bars, made as early as 1894 and boldly embossed Hershey, were a delicious and inexpensive way to snack. After 1907, they were augmented by small, flat-bottom, conically shaped dollops of milk chocolate that he named Hershey's Kisses. And so successful were these silver foil wrapped one-bite chocolate kisses that they were patented and went on to become one of the most successful and well-known products of the Hershey Chocolate Company. On the upper right-hand side, it says Hershey's chocolate for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Try Milton Hershey's chocolate. It was something you began to realize it wasn't just good for you, but it tasted great. Well, Hershey's had started off with his poor mother, Fanny Hershey, seen here, hand wrapping caramel candy for her son. And they were called Crystal A's, the brand name Milton Hershey gave to his caramels. Eventually, the poor woman had to dip them into chocolate before she allowed them to dry, and again wrap them in Crystal A wrappers. Milton Hershey reportedly told his cousin, Frank Snavely, that, quote, caramels are a fad, but chocolate is permanent. I'm going to make chocolate, unquote. Well, this advertisement on the left-hand side is from 1895. It says Bitter Sweets Chocolate. Now look at that poor child crying. I don't know if I'd cry if I had a 4-pound bar of chocolate in my hand. But caramels were good, but chocolate was king. Hershey continued to be an innovative and creative manufacturer of chocolate, introducing new confections that included Sweethearts in 1900, almond chocolate bars in 1908, Mr. Goodbar in 1925, Hershey's chocolate syrup in 1926, chocolate chips in 1928, and the Crackle Bar in 1938. Not only was Hershey's milk chocolate more sustaining than meat, but it was a sweet to eat. So many people looked at this, and I'm sure we all remember the Hershey bar at 5 cents, which is now $1.79 at CVS, as a great way in some ways to have a quick snack. In the 1930s, they offered Hershey's cocoa and marketed it as a food to drink. Remember, this is just not a treat, the sweet. It was a food. And many people realized in that instance that the biggest sale of them all were Hershey's Kisses. Well, in 1907, Hershey's Kisses were introduced to the public. Urban lore has it that the treat was named for the lip-smacking sound of the machinery kissing the conveyor belt during the manufacturing process. In 1921, automated wrapping is introduced to kiss production, as before this technological innovation, kisses were hand wrapped. And the distinctive paper plume is added to thwart imitators. Well, whatever the holiday is, they still offer milk chocolate, but they offer peppermint in different flavors and different colors. But the Hershey Kisses, as you see here on the upper left-hand side, was the perfect gift to my Valentine. We also realized that Milton Hershey believed that every person was morally obligated to share the fruits of his wealth with others. And this belief resulted in the great contributions to his community and the world as a school for orphan boys. Milton Hershey School began as a dream and vision shared by Milton and Catherine Hershey. The Hersheys decided to use their wealth to create a home and school for orphan boys, and the history of Milton Hershey School was founded in 1909. Hershey, Pennsylvania was a place where not just housing for mill managers, but workers were built, places of worship, function halls, theaters, and it was all funded by the wealth of Milton Hershey. But this was an important thing to realize, how many children were really orphans. But this was only for boys. And as you can see, any chocolate factory needed a ready supply of workers. So most of these boys, it was said over 80% of them would get a job at Milton Hershey's plant after they graduated from high school. And seen here, the chocolate bar that helps change lives. Today, the Milton Hershey School is alive and well, has a huge endowment, and has over 1,000 students, all male. There was also, in some ways, though a generous philanthropist, Milton Hershey's gift remains a lesson, not just in kindness and human service, but also in leadership. Those who lead today's organizations and companies across the globe would do well to emulate the example of Milton Hershey. For the key traits of humility, resilience, truthfulness, and generousness that he embodied are as relevant now as ever before. When I found this wonderful photograph, which obviously is AI, I assumed that they were gold bars, but they're gold wrapping on chocolate bars, and Hershey did well. Does anybody remember Whitman samplers? No. Well, Whitman's for my Valentine, and Whitman's sampler was claimed to be the season's most popular messenger, which you can see on the lower center. Founded in 1842 by Stephen Whitman, he opened a small confectionery and fruitiere shop, offering sweets and fruit, and offered a variety of sweets. In 1854, Whitman's choice mixed sugar plums became the first packaged confection in a printed marked box. The Whitman sampler box began in 1915 and quickly became the most popular assortment in the Whitman's line of candy. And here, on the left, a heart-shaped box has three-dimensional paper doll in a voluminous skirt holding a fan. Now, you probably remember the sampler. One would lift the lid and it would tell you exactly what was in that. My grandmother, whose brother worked at Schraffts, did not have that ability. So when we were offered candy as children, my sister and I would look at the box and every one of them had been bitten into. So the ones she didn't like were offered to us. Cadbury chocolate. In 1868, the renowned confectioner Richard Cadbury revolutionized the world of chocolate with the introduction of the first commercially available chocolate bar. He took the traditional process of making chocolate and transformed it into a delicious and accessible product that could be enjoyed by everyone. Cadbury was the first to recognize the potential of chocolate as a treat, and his pioneering efforts laid the groundwork for the production of chocolate bars today. Now, Cadbury, who was in England, was the first chocolate maker to commercialize the connection between romance and confectionery, with the company producing a heart-shaped box of chocolates for Valentine's Day in 1868. Cadbury's was a fine chocolate. My milk chocolate is my favorite, but the whole concept was he made a variety of different chocolates. Seen here in an advertisement from 1890, it shows not just a young boy holding a pot of cocoa essence, but on the left-hand side, it says that Cadbury was makers to the Queen. Not only was Victoria Queen, but she was also the Empress of India, and Cadbury's was served at her table. So people began to see in some ways by the 1930s, Cadbury was a reliable and delicious source. Now, this showed that Cadbury's milk chocolate had 1.5 glasses of full creamery milk in every half-pound slab. So if you didn't have time to drink your milk, you could at least eat a half-pound bar of chocolate and get 1.5 glasses into your body. And of course, there was also Nestle's. And though it is not known when Henri Nestle, seen in the upper left, started working on his infant formula project, but by 1867, Nestle had produced a viable powdered milk product. Although Nestle and his wife were childless, they were aware of the high death rate among infants. In addition, fresh milk was not always available in large towns. Nestle combined cow's milk with grain and sugar to produce a substitute for breast milk. On the right-hand side is that advertisement. And this was something that not only combined with water was not only good, but it was good for the child's health. Eventually, Nestle's went on, as we see here, with a milk condensation process that enabled to perfect his milk chocolate formulation in 1875 after several years of effort. You have to realize milk chocolate is something that you're combining fats and milk. They never usually combine. The aspect was through the conching of that chocolate and milk, he was able to perfect milk chocolate. And in 1879, the Nestle Company was founded, which eventually became one of the largest Europe-based confection industries. Nestle's milk chocolate candy bars are solid chocolate goodness. The advertisement is wonderful, but seen on the lower right-hand side, they not only made Nestle's milk chocolate, Nestle's almond bars, Sportsman bar, and Nestle's peanut bar, Nestle's Crunch, and Nestle's semi-sweet chocolate, a variety of different textures as well as flavors. So Nestle's, Hershey's, Cadbury were all making readily edible chocolate, unlike bakers. Now, many people realized, what can you do with chocolate? Well, if there's any left over, you can make Toll House cookies. Now, the Toll House seen here was on Route 18 in Whitman, Massachusetts. There were many toll houses, especially on straight, level roads. You'd pay a toll, but in this instance, the toll house was also a place where you could stop for a potent libation or even dinner. Well, by the 1930s and 40s, it was called the Toll House Restaurant, run by Kenneth and Ruth Wakefield. This was a place that everyone loved, but the whole concept was they actually would make Toll House cookies. Mrs. Wakefield, a former home economics teacher, came up with a recipe for chocolate piece cookies, not chocolate chip, which in turn inspired Nestle's to create chocolate chips. She was someone who was really quite savvy. This advertisement said that everybody's making Toll House cookies, whole morsels of Nestle's semi-sweet chocolate in every bite. Now, the whole concept was, yes, chocolate chips are well known today, but they weren't as well known at this period. The story was that she was making cookies. She didn't have what she needed, and she simply chopped up Nestle's milk chocolate. And she made not only a delicious cookie, but she made a name for herself. Well, seeing here, Ruth Wakefield and her daughter Jane make Toll House cookies with the recipe that made her famous. She chopped up a Nestle's milk chocolate sweet bar and added it to the cookie dough, expecting it to melt. The popular crispy Toll House chocolate crunch cookies led to a deal with Nestle's, providing her with a lifetime supply of chocolate in exchange for the recipe rights. So this is a good adage for all of us to go home and create a chocolate cookie that we have chocolate for the rest of our lives. It was something that people loved. Do you remember Schraffts chocolate? Well, this building, which is in Sullivan Square in Charlestown, was one of the largest chocolate factories in New England, but it was founded by a man named William Schrafft. Seen here on the left-hand side, Schraffts Chocolate Company was founded in 1861 by German immigrant Wilhelm, but anglicized to William Schrafft, who began by making gumdrops and candy canes. A landmark in Sullivan Square in Charlestown, Schraffts in their heyday was the largest general line confectioner in the country and employed over 1,600 workers. In that instance, They made a variety of things, including holiday chocolates, Valentine's Day, Easter, Mother's Day, as well as even Halloween and Christmas. But it says, "You're always right with a Valentine by Schraffts." And through the years, you're right with Schraffts. From her girlhood to her golden wedding, your Valentine loves the special luxury of Schraffts' exclusive blend of purest chocolate. Schraff's delicious centers are created to tempt her taste for the unusual. And with every Schraff's assortment, you give the prestige of a world-famous name. Well, as I mentioned about my grandmother, the chocolate, her brother, my great uncle, Dominic Ginelli, was a chocolate dipper. And as a child, he tried to teach me what the squiggles on top of every chocolate meant. They didn't usually have enough time for me to look at them. I ate the chocolates, I loved the chocolates, but the whole concept was it was a specialized industry. But Schraff's went on in 1898 to start restaurants. Now, Frank Shattuck, who had been employed by Schraff's, bought Schraff's in 1898 and operated the company's retail stores, which by 1968 evolved into 55 genteel restaurants, mostly in New York. There was one on Boylston Street in Boston and one on Newbury Street. The restaurant served sandwiches, light refreshments, and hard candy counters. And they were in direct competition with Bailey's. So you began to see that Schraff's was more than just a chocolate company. Now they were offering a wonderful lunch, and it became quite popular. Does anybody remember Fannie Farmer old-time candies? Well, this was founded by Frank O'Connor, which grew to over 400 candy stores that offer gleaming white counters with many delicious candies and interesting nut meats from all corners of the world. Fannie Farmer was named in honor of the culinary expert Fannie Farmer. Now, do you see the difference? Fannie and Fannie IE, but none of her recipes were used for the candy. It was a perfect way to market the candy and subtly suggest reflected glory. Fannie Farmer's high standards of quality were well known, and the culinary expert Fannie Farmer's silhouette or portrait was often used on boxes of candy. Seen on the left-hand side, this is the store that was at the corner of Tremont and Winter Streets. This was the one we went to as children. Not only did they offer candy, but freshly roasted nut meats. But during the Easter season, they had sugared eggs that one would look through and sometimes see a wonderful either secular or religious subject. But Fannie Farmer was well known. Granted, they had 400 stores, but they also, seen here, would actually offer candy for the Campfire Girls of America. Now, Fannie Farmer's candy was named in honor of culinary expert Fannie Farmer. But everybody loves Fannie Farmer candy because they are always fresh. Well, seen here, girls would sell candy, not cookies, and they actually were doing this wo-he-lo, which was the name of the Campfire Girls camp. These would be bought for 50 cents and the children would sell them for 75 cents. So a quarter would usually go back to the coffers. And Fannie Farmer's candy, an old reliable source, provided that for close to 30 years. Phillips Chocolate was founded in 1925 by Philip and Constantina Damari Strazula, and they began selling chocolate out of their home in 1925, eventually opening a shop in Belmont known as Phillips Sweets. They were located on Phillips Street. Now located on Morrissey Boulevard in Dorchester, the colonial-inspired candy shop was opened in 1952 by brothers Matthew and Philip Strazula and their brother-in-law, Joseph Sammartino. Phillips Chocolates is Boston's oldest chocolatier and is run by the third and fourth generation cousins, Joseph Sammartino Jr., Philip Strazula III, and Joe's son, Michael Sammartino. If you don't know this, this is a wonderful chocolate. And you can get a variety of things. They must have over 100 different types of chocolate bonbons. But you might know the turtles, which are wonderful roasted cashews covered in a different type of chocolate. I used to enjoy them until I got to this age. And of course, seen here during Valentine's Day, Linda McKenzie on the left fills dozens of heart-shaped candies with Phillips chocolates for Valentine's Day. Now, they were £1, but if you really loved your wife or girlfriend, on the right-hand side, maybe you wanted to buy that £5 heart of candy. That would truly make an impression, especially in your bank account. And another manufacturer of chocolate was the Mar-O-Bar Company, which was a candy company opened in 1911 by Franklin and Ethel Mars in Tacoma, Washington. Mars made the first Milky Way bars in 1923, and these bars had a nougat center and saw immediate success. And so successful was Mars that in 1929 he expanded his candy business by opening a plant in Chicago, where in 1930 he made the first Snickers candy bar, named after a beloved family horse. Did anybody know that Snickers was a horse? But those Snickers candy bars were equally good. And of course, M&Ms. Forrest Mars and Bruce Murray started M&M Limited. And the candy venture was in Newark, New Jersey, and was to produce a small round disc of milk chocolate covered in a hard candy shell. These were called M&Ms and marketed them as melting in your mouth and not in your hand. The new M&Ms became a very popular candy during World War II when they were packed in the cardboard tubes, shipped and included in the kits of soldiers and sailors with their food rations. And by the time the GIs returned home, they were addicted to them. And by 1956, they were the country's best-selling candy. So M&Ms, Snickers, and a variety of candy bars are things we remember. But today, chocolate is proof God loves us and wants us to be happy. As chocolate appeals to all five senses, sight, touch, hearing, smell, and taste, we hope that you have enjoyed this brief history of chocolate. Thank you for coming. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Does anybody have any candy?